the last 3 months have been either closed completely or opened as an essential business to be able to produce PPE and other things. And in many ways, this conversation is about not necessarily a return to normalcy, but making a transition from being a PPE factory to being a functioning makerspace again. And I think it's not just what the rules are for bringing people in, but what have we learned from about makerspaces during these last 3 months, and how does it make you think about the future for them? I will point that one of the models for makerspaces from the beginning was gyms. You pay a membership to use the equipment there. I saw yesterday, I think it's 24-hour fitness closed 30 locations and filed for bankruptcy. So a lot of those businesses that depend on in-person services and membership, have been really challenged by the pandemic. So I'll welcome everyone here, but let me first introduce Dorothy Jones Davis of Nation of Makers, and welcome her as my co-host here. As she has been. It's good to have you again. You have anything to let us know about what's going on in Nation of Makers?
Sure. So we just had a really amazing NomCon, and tonight's conversation actually really dovetails well with the conversations we had at Nation of Makers convening. Our theme was sustainability, building and supporting an ecosystem that sustains us all, and really had a lot of dialogue about these kinds of things. How do we kind of keep ourselves going as a maker community? How do we keep ourselves going as maker spaces? How do we keep ourselves going individually, because we're all running out of steam, and emotionally? So I think these are questions that we're all really asking ourselves, and it's really important to think about. So I'm excited for tonight's conversation and for the dialogue that will continue, because I think none of us know what the right pathway is for it, right? Like, we've never been in this kind of situation where the whole world shut down, right? So I think there are a couple times in history, but not very often. So I think for a lot of us, it's our only time in our lifetime that this kind of thing has happened. So I'm just excited about that. And if folks are interested, our NomCon conversations will be eventually available on video. Our keynotes are available now on our YouTube channel, so check them out if you get a chance. But I'm really excited to hear from everyone here. I see a lot of our friendly faces from our community of folks that are doing amazing things around the country. So
yeah. Okay, great. We also had Lars just joined us. He came in as attendee and promoted him to a panelist. So April, would you kick us off? And what I'd kind of like to just give each of you a turn, tell us a little bit about your space, about yourself, and what you've been doing the last 30 to 90 days, really, and kind of what that discussion of reopening and serving members again is how that's happening inside your organization.
So I am from OpenWorks. We are a nonprofit makerspace located in central Baltimore. During non-COVID times, we have a very diverse maker community. We have everything from youth who come to our space for story time to seniors. We have entrepreneurs, people that are showing up for classes in all of our shops. And then we also have studio space. So we have resident members who are basing their businesses and artistic practices out of our makerspace. When we're not during COVID times, we have classes happening, events happening in the space on a regular basis. We were very sad in March to have to halt all of that. We, at that time, had to lay off 22 part-time employees and furlough them. We kind of closed up shop and went home. And our leadership team, we were, staying in contact over text message and just checking in with each other and feeling really helpless and wanting to do something. And then a local medical system reached out to us and let us know that they were in need of PPE. And we kind of did some research and found out about like the shortage and, these 3D files that were open source, that were on the web available for folks to print for face shields. And we posted some things on social media to see what kind of interest we would get. And in a matter of days, we had about 350 volunteers who had access to 3D printers. I think we estimated it was a network of about almost 1,000 3D printers. And we put a drop box on the front porch of our makerspace. And we're able to raise some funds to kind of purchase materials that we would need on the front, like the plastic sheeting. And we fired up our 3D printers and created a sort of production assembly line. And over the course of the past, the 3 months, we produced almost, I believe, 28,000 face shields, including a government contract for the USDA of custom face shields that they could clip onto the helmets of their inspectors. And so right now we are winding down and figuring out what it looks like to reopen a makerspace.
Okay. Thank you, April. We'll come back to you. Joe Rotundi. Joe is from The Forge in Greensboro, North Carolina. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Dale. Thanks for inviting me on this. April, really great work. That's incredible. 28,000 pieces of PPE. I'd imagine that there's going to be a lot of similar narratives as we go across all the panelists here. We, like a lot of other small businesses and makerspaces, were very, concerned about the pandemic and concerned about how we would survive through some shutdown. So we began exploring some of the PPE, PPP is the loan we applied for.
Exactly.
PPE is, we began exploring where we would exist in helping out with that. We didn't want to make something that wouldn't be useful. We saw this incredible response from makers around the world, makers, designers, and engineers around the world who were trying to problem solve this. And so we kept an eye out on that activity. Lars was kind enough to invite me on a meeting he had with some of the Boston makerspaces, so I could see into some of the problem solving they were doing. And we put out, we just put out some experiments and some prototypes we were running of different PPE we saw being produced by different makers. And that got us reconnected with a few other maker groups here in North Carolina. We got connected with the Alamance Makers Guild and the Elon Maker Hub, and created some face shields for Cone Health, which is a hospital system here in Guilford County. And that segued to a relationship making a few thousand specialty face shields known as PAPRA or CAPRA devices, and they were having issues with their manufacturer. Fortunately, our area did not see the spikes that have been seen in some of the larger metropolitan areas. So there's a different demand for PPE here. They were trying to stock up to prepare for potential spikes. And so there was a rush on orders for this CAPRA or PAPRA device. And we helped NC State. We helped them produce a bunch of those shields, and we're starting to wind down out of that now. And as restrictions have been lifted in North Carolina, starting to slowly ease back into access at the Forge, using some online reservation systems, restricting how many people are in the space at one time, and then how many people are utilizing each area. We were fortunate enough to get that PPP loan. You have to think about that, PPP. But we're fortunate to get the PPP loan, so we're able to bring our staff back on who had been furloughed for a couple of months, so we could start thinking about how to pivot the organization to deal with some long-term problems you may need to solve together as makerspaces. The economic turmoil that we may all face here soon, figuring out how to pivot. So right now fortunately we have a little bit of a runway. We're looking at online classes, doing some contract work for some local groups, including a children's museum, and trying to figure out the future. I'm interested in hearing from the other panelists on the same topics.
Good. Rachel said from Ace Monster Toys in Berkeley. Could you tell us more? I know you were busy doing a lot of things there, and are you starting to transition into normal operations in any way?
Our store is much similar. We decided to go with adding extra work in our reopening plan. We're also rebranding as Ace Makerspace because it's a better mouthful. And we're actually in Oakland on the border.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. On the border of Berkeley and Emeryville and Oakland. But we're definitively an Oakland set. In our PPE adventures, we we're forced by the dynamic of the situation to reimagine our relationship with the community when it comes to emergency response. We were used to natural disaster responses, like helping during fire season and stuff. And we're like, whoa, what do we do now? What's our role? What can we do? And for PPE, we decided to focus on at-risk populations because of the scale of our space and what we could produce. And so we went for a very targeted type of product instead of volume to really hit folks. And in that experience, we had some key learnings that for us are transitioning over into how we're planning and thinking about how we're reopening and what kind of space we're going to have. And having our participation and community response be part of the thinking of how we restructure and redevelop our programs, but also when none of the options you're comfortable with are familiar or that are familiar to you are on the table anymore, you really have to kind of like, you got a blank page, like the sky's the limit, and in so much as what is possible. And so for us, it's both wow, an overwhelming set of work, but also kind of exciting to rethink, what can we do to be COVID safe, but also what is meaningful and what is marketable as we rebuild our membership base. Because as of today, we are down 50% from
in the number of members.
Shutdown. Yeah, from when shutdown hit, which is actually lucky for us, because what that means is 50% of our membership constituency decided to keep paying their dues, even though we're closed for everything but PPE, which we consider that amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel.
Sure.
Let me go to Cheryl Kennedy, who's in Troy, New York. Cheryl, there's a rather long name of your space, and you'll have to introduce it yourself here.
Sure. So my name is Cheryl Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of Tech Valley Center of Gravity. So we are a makerspace, we are a prototyping center, we're a manufacturing incubator, and a children's makerspace as well. So as we entered March, we got ourselves, we essentially declared ourselves essential and started up our PPE projects with a variety of local manufacturers that we had partnerships with. We got some funding from our local county, Rensselaer County IDA, in order to help us get the materials to start that up. We are very fortunate in that we are nonprofit, and our board president is also the senior vice president of the Center for Economic Growth and also the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So we had a lot of pre-existing relationships that allowed us to ramp up really quickly. So we did a few different PPE projects. We utilized our membership. We have about 250 members. We had about 250 members. Much like Rachel, we have lost a significant amount of our members. I would say what we did there is we actually changed to a pay what you can plan in order to not lose our members from our membership listing. So a significant portion have been paying a reduced amount. We know everybody is having financial hardships at this point in time, so we were really glad to see continued participation from a lot of members. But really, our hearts went out to our members as well, knowing that they, couldn't come into the space, they couldn't use our space, but we're still trying to make good on their payments. So our facilities and incubator director really, took the lead on our projects. We had a few different designs that we were using. We were using the Werkstand model and the Prusa model. So the Werkstand model, our members were using their home 3D printers, and the Werkstand model was more a thinner face shield that we were actually able to use overhead projector films for. So we had a bunch of local nonprofits and Emma Willard private school up on the hill near us donate a bunch of those, so we were able to use those. So we didn't have to pay for anything. That was nice. And then we had a lot of donations from our manufacturing partners for the Prusa face shields that we were producing. And we had about 5 different manufacturers working with us on that using Stratasys 3D printers. So that was excellent. We have 2.25 employees. I'm not sure who the 0.25 is, but we got a PPP loan as well. We started very early work on our reopening plans and tried to make very clear delineations and phases. If you've been watching New York at all, you know that we are working in a 4-phase plan, and sometimes we don't receive a heck of a lot of notice on when our phase is going to start. So we've tried to maintain flexibility there. We pivoted as much program as possible to virtual. We actually started up a virtual product development luncheon series, which, it's not fortuitous to start up a luncheon series when you can't eat lunch together, but it was very well attended. And our manufacturing incubator, we brought all of our, we offer low-cost engineering consultation, and we brought that all online with help from Zoom. And towards the end of April, early May, I would say, Dan and I started talking about, just wondering what other makerspaces were doing, how people were going to open, and how we might start a conversation. So I reached out to Dan, and we kind of started from there, and we've had a couple of meetings across New York State, and we started a little file, because we're a little bit early on the opening side, to share graphics and our reopening plan and the different things that we're doing. So that's been pretty well received as well.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. Let's go to Jeremy in Seattle. Seattle was one of the first real hotspots in the country, and still a lot going on there. Jeremy's with Seattle Makers.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We jumped on it pretty early, and we ordered a bunch of Mylar, overnighted it, and planned to make a ton of it, and then ran into the bureaucracy of hospitals. And weeks later, they were still asking for samples and modifications through insurance groups, and we just started to let's go for it. Let's just get these out to where they're going to make a difference. So we started out just getting them out to grocers, homeless shelter workers, just getting them out into people, between people, and places where there's a lot of human interaction, hoping that it would kind of shift. And then we gave more to healthcare workers once the first NIH one. Actually, a guy, David, I forget his last name. He's from Microsoft over in Redmond, and he designed the first one that was approved by the NIH, and stopped by, and we started getting those to hospitals. And then we started reopening, and our main goal was just to focus on the gaps. Where can we fill in that isn't being served? So we shifted to reopening, and then we got requests for fitting loops. So one of our designers, John, made a extended one that goes 1 inch or 1.5 inch farther out from the face. So then it got through the dentist network, and we had tons of orders with people happy to contribute, and that was amazing to see, just a huge contribution come back. And our membership similarly went from I think 90 to 40 or 50 something. But our volunteers went through the roof. So it was really cool to see a lot of people willing to contribute. Another thing we did, we saw a lot of people starting to do this. So we made a video. One of our volunteers runs a production company. So he made a really nice video on how to reopen. My background's in health and safety. I worked at a cancer center doing hazmat for 8 years while I was dreaming about makerspaces and learning CAD and 3D printing. And then right before I made the jump. So that came in handy. Did a bunch of PPE training with everybody and basically how to run a virology lab, and we filmed that and got it out. And then we saw people, like the PPE that was out there, we saw how can we improve this? We saw people wearing masks that didn't fit, like beards hanging out, kids with masks hanging off of them. So Jenny Faldine, one of our lead sewists, actually did like 9 prototypes on different size faces. And we're really excited about that one, called laser ninja masks is what we're calling it, because we're laser cutting the fabric, and they're kind of, I don't know if I have mine here, but yeah, they fit really well, like a ninja mask. That's what they reminded me of. You know, a month and a half later, we got elastic, so a lot of the tie sewing is done. Another project we made, a bias strip that we're going to put up on our site. So it's 3D printed, and you can pull it through. We've seen double or single ones, but Umar made a double one, so it folds in and then it folds in again, so you have no outer edges, and you can just pull it through and iron and make tons of strips. And then the final one I'll mention.
Oh, go on.
Yeah.
No, you mentioned your
last part-
video. Someone asked about, would you share a link to your video that you met, the how to reopen video?
Yeah, I couldn't find it. I brought Joy on. She's the other Jeremy. I
Okay.
saw the links like 10 minutes before the video started. So,
Well, if you can, just put it in the chat while the program runs.
I'm grabbing the
Yeah.
link right now for you.
Okay. Thank you, Joy. Go on, finish. You said one other thing.
Yeah, the other thing is we saw hand washing become unavailable, and the city of Seattle reached out. Some of the volunteers who work with them, we work with the homeless population, were saying that they can't even use libraries or public bathrooms. So we jumped on that, and I have a little photo I'll show you. This is our plywood version. We made it look like a hand wash, like a soap pump. And so from far away, visually, you can see that it represents hand washing. It's got a fill and a drain spout on the top. And then this one's PVC, but we've made one out of solid metal because a lot of them get beaten up or stolen. I think they had 4 of them. I had 6 of them, and 4 of them disappeared. The plastic ones from Honey Bucket. They use your foot to pump, and they were like $10,000 each. So we're like, we can do better than that. So we talked to a bunch of welders. We have a PCB that's being made and produced. We found buttons that are hammer-proof and waterproof. And we're working with a company that does a bladder system. So the same space occupied by the clean water can then occupy the gray water inside the metal tank, which will be galvanized. And it's going to be a 50-year like lifespan product that can help with disaster relief. And now we're in the stages of getting the word out and hopefully raising a bunch of money to produce those.
Okay. So is Seattle Makerspace open?
No. We have like a 1.5 phase, I guess is what we're in, which is like phase 2 with reductions in the amount of people who can be in there. So we just started our first online classes, and we're looking at how to use that. We can have, I think, 5 people in a room max. So we're going to do part of like our certifications on the laser or the 3D printer online, and then you'll be able to come in for 30 minutes with a mask, do a practical test.
Okay.
But that'll at least open the door for people to do projects and know the software and the design parameters to start making the projects. And then we're going to lower basically have the self-serve price be guided use. So we'll just do a Zoom and say, we'll walk
Okay,
you through
good.
it. That's
Well, listen, we'll get back to that in a minute, but let me invite Lars. I don't think we have your camera on, so we can't see you, but maybe if you could turn that on. There we are.
Sure, there we go.
Lars Torres is from Artisans Asylum in Somerville, Massachusetts. Welcome, Lars. Good to see you again.
Hey, Dale. Likewise. Hey, everybody. Hey, April. It's nice to meet somebody from Baltimore. You guys have been killing it on social media. They've been like keeping us going, seeing what's been going on out there in Baltimore. It's been great.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, so we did close on the 23rd of March to members and to the public, and pivoted like many of you to PPE production. We were able to get essential worker designation for the PPE production, so we never fully closed, which was good. Like a lot of you, we saw some membership decline. It wasn't as big as some of you, Rachel. I feel for you. I think we lost like 15%, which was still a hit. You know, we have about 6 open studios that when we're ready, we'll start to fill. But we are in, so we have 3 phases, not the state of Massachusetts, it has 4, but we have sort of 3 phases of opening that I think we're gonna lay on top of the state of Massachusetts 4 phases and probably go slower, you know, frankly, you know, than what the state might do. We're seeing a lot of sort of movement forward and then pauses, ambiguity, and then maybe a step back. And so we're just gonna, like, we got 3 phases. And the first phase that we're in right now, which is we're back open to members with priority given to members who earn a livelihood at the asylum. We have a lot of folks who are dependent, you know, for their income on what they're able to produce at the asylum. So we've given them priority. And even though we have 40,000 square feet, you know, our capacity, we're gonna limit to 50, because when we add up 4 people in the wood shop, 2 in the machine shop, you know, it starts to get to about, you know, 50. So we're gonna
What size total space? You have a pretty big space too, right?
Yeah, 42,000 square feet is where we're at right now.
Bigger than your average makerspace.
Well, I don't know, average keeps getting bigger. Yeah, I mean, shoot, but thanks. We did one interesting, and so, sorry, so we're in that phase 1 right now. We're really open. We're prioritizing work for folks whose livelihoods depend on access to the shops. Our doors are locked. You know, people have to use their cards to get in. Like all y'all, we have sanitizing stations everywhere. I've never seen so much hand sanitizer in my life. There's a brewery next door, Aeronaut Brewery. We bought, I think, 20 gallons of hand sanitizer that they've been making, and we just kind of distribute it throughout the space. We have some in reserve because we're not sure how quickly it's going to get used. You know, some people like me probably use a gallon a day. Other people use a teaspoon. So we're kind of watching it. It's been kind of fun though, because members want to get in there and innovate for you too. And so we have one guy, Scott Janasek, who got a bunch of hi-hat, you know, the hi-hat pedals donated from a church and retrofit those to be sanitizer dispensers, so you didn't have to use your hands. That was kind of awesome. We did have to build a big enclosure at our front desk area to keep our front desk staff, you know, nice and isolated from traffic. Anyways, that's all phase 1. Phase 2 is we'll start to allow our members who are day pass users back in. Right now, it's only monthly members who come in. We'll start to increase our capacity to, you know, 75 to 100 throughout the space, allow day pass users and guests. That's the big thing right now, is no one can bring guests in just because of the tracing and all of that. Contact alerting, I guess, is what we're calling it. All that weirdness. So guests are too hard, but come July, if things are on track, we'll open it to that group. And then in August, we'll start bringing classes online. I know for like a lot of you, classes are a big part of your revenue. It's a big part of our revenue. We've tried to pivot online, but honestly, it's really hard because our value proposition is the garage that you can't get because you have a condo and an apartment. And so we're really just struggling with online classes. We have some, you know, nature drawing and animation and some fun stuff, but it doesn't compare to people getting in their hands on the machines. So looking forward to that. Behind me, we did open a second space, which is interesting, maybe unusual. We entered a partnership with Harvard University to continue our PPE production because gown production, these isolation gowns, these protective gowns, are so hard to get, and they're consumed at such high quantity. There was a real demand for them, particularly for smaller organizations, not retirement homes, but hospice set places and things like this that need them, that are smaller. The big medical centers have access, but there's a lot of smaller providers that don't. So Harvard authored a very generous license on this 3,500 square foot space behind me, where we'll be producing gowns for the next 4 months of gown making, and see where that goes. One of the stories that comes out of COVID-19 that impacted at least the leadership of the asylum, we haven't had a chance to talk about it all together as a community, 500 people, but the health disparities of COVID by race are huge. And one of the things that we've taken away as a lesson from this and the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd's death is that we need to do more. We need to step up to be stronger allies. And we're starting to look at how we can use PPE production as both a consciousness raising endeavor as well as a financial empowerment endeavor. So we are working with the city of Boston, with their Office of Returning Citizens, and also with the Roxbury Center for Financial Empowerment, to, instead of just having it all volunteers, look at ways that we can employ some of the particularly COVID impacted communities in gown production. So we're really excited about that new line of work as well.
That's amazing. I want to say thank you so much, Lars. I wanted you to finish your sentence before I clapped.
Well, it's an honor. It's our team. It's our community partners who we're listening to, Harvard University, obviously. So we're doing a lot of learning as we go. Thank you for the support.
Great. Finally, let me introduce our last panelist, and I appreciate hearing from all of you, but Dan Schneiderman doesn't particularly represent a space, but he's been working with some space. I think you're the New York State organizer for NomCon. You've been the Maker Faire organizer in Rochester, or co-organizer. So Dan, welcome. And why don't you talk a bit about the process that you've been involved in over the last couple of weeks, working with Cheryl and other people?
It's been a crazy couple months. I know right at the start, probably back in March, because I help out on a handful of different events in addition to the Rochester Fair and a few other ones. I was already starting to think about PPE right before everything shut down in New York, because I'm part of the group that puts together our local First Robotics Regional. And we were, trying to get our hands on as much extra PPE back then, just because, let's put it this way, the competition was the 13th and 14th. And then I think we shut down on the 14th, which was pretty crazy. Everything had to be shut down. I was already starting to think about reading as many studies as possible, how to keep people spread out. And then the article about the Budsman 3D printer design came out on the March 17th, and that kind of kicked everything off on my end, where, well, I wasn't producing any PPE. I was sending it to everyone I knew who had a 3D printer, every makerspace I knew. Between helping out with bringing makers to the New York State Fair, running a statewide summit a few years ago, I just started emailing everyone to get the files, get printing, try and get something going. I was hit by a couple of companies in Rochester of asking what resources could we use, and everything was a bit chaotic back in March. So just trying to point people in the right direction. The one thing I want to bring up that one of our local makerspaces did, and I'm really happy that they did this, in addition to people taking home their 3D printers, they actually ran a blood drive out of the makerspace. They dedicated the space, they worked with our local representatives, and they said, there are more additional needs that need to be done. How else can we help? And I love the fact that they worked with our local government to produce at least one and I think 1 or 2 other blood drives. And then, like Cheryl said, this had to be late April, early May. It was, yeah, that sounds about right. When she messaged me saying, hey, we should get a bunch of makerspaces together. And I've kept up with almost everyone over the years. And it just, well, we picked a date. And I think we got at least like 20, 25 people at that first meeting representing every section of New York State, or just about every section. And we're still building on that. A lot of people had a lot of the same issues. I have to give Cheryl a lot of credit for that first meeting. One of the things that she did that we have to do in New York State is we have to submit a plan to the government saying step by step what we're going to do. And Cheryl went through her paperwork, just showed everyone else how to do it, shared the paperwork, and said, if you're looking for an example here, we can help. And I'm sure Cheryl can talk a lot more about that, but that was fantastic. It's been interesting seeing the wide variety across all the spaces, where I think the first New York City makerspace just reopened as they entered phase 1 in New York City.
Which one was that?
I believe it's Makerspace NYC.
Okay.
They're in both Staten Island and Brooklyn.
Okay. Scott.
They used to be under this, They
Yeah,
used to be under the Staten Island Makerspace name.
Yeah, good. I'll try to get. We're gonna continue this discussion on Thursday's program and invite 6 or 7 other makerspaces in. I wanted to get them in, but thank you for bringing them up.
I recommend talking to them. I recommend talking to NYC Makes PPE, as I was chatting with them when they just launched their campaign and was trying to spread the word about it. There was a lot of individual makers trying to produce things all over the place. One of the things I liked out of Rochester was Rochester has a large deaf and hard of hearing population. And so face masks prove a bit of a problem, especially for lip reading. And so I know some of my really good friends at Origami, Larry and Kelly, as they weren't going to events, they just started producing PPE and designs and illustrations on how to make your own. But they also did a lot of prototyping for visible masks, which I'm starting to see more and more of in the region.
That's great. So let's go to Cheryl. I think it's kind of curious when you have to sort of tell the government, in detail. I presume not all of you have to do this, but maybe it's perhaps the most rigorous place to start is learning from Cheryl. What kinds of things did you have to describe or account for?
So luckily there's actually a template. So you didn't have to, reinvent the wheel. It was a lot of pretty basic questions on contact tracing. How many people and how are we going to keep track of them? And to be honest with you, we were never not thinking about that. We're a pretty big space, not nearly as large as Lars's space, but we have about 15,000 square feet and multiple zones. So we were kind of trying to figure out, for us, contact tracing would have a lot to do with how many people we let in the building. We have a fob system, and the person who created our fob system actually created a temperature logging system for us. So we hit everybody with a non-contact temporal thermometer when they come in, and we actually connect it to their membership account. So we can track everybody's temperature at that point. But a lot of what we did for our New York State reopening template was based on the manufacturers in our area. They had come up with a manufacturing pledge. So we tried to model ourselves on that because we assumed that would be our safest. Our safest bet was to go to really model ourselves after them. It seems to be working for us so far. We also limited the amount of people in the space, and we set up appointment calendars for each of our zones so we can know where everybody is going in the building. And normally we're 24/7. We're only 11 to 7 Monday through Friday right now. So
does this require you to have more staff than you would normally have to kind of monitor this?
No, we are we run on fumes.
Yeah.
And
You
fairy
said two
dust.
people, so okay.
So we have we have 3 employees. We have 20 plus volunteers. But what we really tried to do is make sure that we had our setup, our fob setup in place so that we would know who was going in and out of the building. We do lock down the doors so that people can't come in of their own accord after hours at this point. And really, we have maintained weekly meetings with our membership this entire time. So every Tuesday, actually, my membership meeting's going on right now. I popped in to say hello, tell everybody where I was going. They were really excited. You know, they were like, go, go.
What's the response of members? Have they been anxious to get in the space, or
At first,
are they wary about getting in the space? Yeah.
both. So it has changed over time, as I'm sure it has for everybody. So at first it was like, we're never closing. We can't do that. And, you know, absolutely, we're going down with the ship here, and this isn't really happening. And then we got the shutdown order, you know, at the end of the second week of March. And after that, it was very much, you know, when do you think we'll open? We don't know. As we have slowly started reopening, our reopen date was June 3rd for manufacturing only. And then 2 weeks later, we were open to professional services. We have innovation spaces and a lot of we have a lot of non-makers in the space as well, using and renting innovation spaces. So at that point, we also asked, you know, if you don't have specific business that you need to attend to in the building or with our equipment, you know, if you can do it from home, you should. And everybody has been pretty accepting of that. And we had a very open discussion about our reopening and how stringent we should be on our reopening procedures. And our entire membership really erred on the side of being as cautious as possible, doing as much contact tracing as possible, and really not cutting any corners. So we were happy that everyone seemed to be on the same page, and the attitudes really changed over 3 months. I mean, it was very lackadaisical at first, as I'm sure it was everywhere. You know, this can't possibly be happening right now, to, oh my goodness, yes, we'll stay home. Thank you. So
yeah. April, you're a membership director at OpenWorks. Could you talk about both the communication with members and their, you know, how much they've influenced the decision making by the leadership of OpenWorks, and what they're looking forward to now? You're on mute, April. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So we, when we were in the thick of face shield production, we sent out like a monthly MailChimp, like, this is what we're doing. And we made sure to kind of like update social media regularly so that people could see what was going on. But as we started getting to, I'd say like 3/4 of the way through the face shield project, we sent out a digital survey just to kind of like check in and see how people were doing and feeling, and kind of as a litmus test to see what people are thinking about coming back. And the responses from that were a lot of very lukewarm, like, I'm planning to wait and see. And a handful of folks that were, you know, like, can you open yesterday? And then also a handful of folks that are like, no way, I'm not coming back, or it's going to be a long time before I'm coming back in this space. So we really started thinking about like, okay, how do we make the space inhabitable and safe, and what things can we change in the building and in practice? I think one of the great things about this like hard pause is that we've been kind of for 4 years, from opening, you know, almost 4 years we've been open. It's been very much building the ship as we go, and like having, you know, 350 people that have something to say about every little thing that you do. So having this kind of like hard pause to kind of like take a look and assess, like, what things need to change about our systems to begin with. One of the main things was that we don't make people check in at the front desk when they come in. They have key cards and can access all the different rooms, but there's no sort of like central kind of like check-in, and that's going to be like crucial going forward. And that is like a shift in culture. People come and show up and are in their mindset to do their thing, and so now we're going to be doing this thing that's like, oh, we do things differently now. And so we're also using this opportunity with people thinking about sort of like washing their hands more and hand sanitizer, doing the things that you need to do to kind of keep your space germ free. But that's like more regular cleaning. So there's going to be less dust on the wood shop windows and things like that. And asking people to participate more in the active cleaning, because it's got to be a community effort for us to keep the space clean. So I'm excited about what that's going to look like, 2 or 3 years from now. I think.
How about classes? Have you had to deal with classes, courses? What
Yeah,
you're
so
thinking out this summer?
We totally had to halt classes. And so far that we've been kind of classified as like a gym, and our state is saying, okay, well, gyms can hold classes outside. That doesn't really make sense for us. We're planning on doing for summer camp kits that people can purchase, and then there'll be a digital component so that they can kind of do projects at home during the week for our young folks. We have our teen program. They're sort of in the process right now of figuring out a summer solution for our teens. We have a program in Baltimore called Youth Works, where kids actually get paid to have jobs over the summer. And so we're figuring out how can we make that distance working or work from home for our teens, keep them engaged in making. And then we're going to be making a library of videos for all of our safety stuff and refreshers for folks when they're back in the space. We're definitely going to have less staff people in the building so technical assistance. So we want to build a more robust library of like, this is how you troubleshoot this problem on the laser cutter. And we're also talking about sort of like a help desk situation where you can kind of call a tech or FaceTime with a tech to get assistance in a shop for folks and members that are used to like leaning on our technicians a little bit more for assistance and are newer to this space Makerspace members.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Rachel, it sounded that you might have that the new Ace Makerspace kind of benefited a bit from this pause, as well as what April was talking about, that maybe the leadership and it was time to sort of figure things out a little bit differently.
Absolutely. This May was our 10-year anniversary as well. So
Wow.
It was like,
Yeah.
We were ripe for figuring out who we were and in a new way, and people embraced the change. And in that regard, and one of the benefits that is playing out in members returning for us is that we did a good job of like setting the parameters for what it would take to shut us down, but not so much in what was the plan to come back. But we did do, to supplement that, we were really robust about how are we going to make PPE in a safer environment? How are we going to educate people? What hard tools were we going to build? How did we do our physical reconfiguring? And the benefit of that is that we were super transparent with our members about what we did. And it instilled in them a sense of confidence that we could plan something that was going to be both safe and have sustainability in mind for when we reopened. And for us, it was like, I hate to call it experimentation because we researched ourselves quite robustly with our health measures, but it did still in confidence, and we got a lot of buy-in. And so what we're hearing from members is a lot of buy-in for that, which turned into buy-in for brand change and just reimagining what we're going to do. A third of our space was co-working classroom space, because that's a revenue stream of easy maintenance. And that's dead. That's dead for 1.5 to 2 years at least. And so now we're like, what are we going to do with that 1,200 square feet? How are we going to take advantage of it? And just thinking more holistically about those changes. And people embraced it. I mean, all makers love a puzzle. This was just, here's a puzzle, folks.
Yeah. But do you think it was also leadership? I mean, it was a time for some people to make some decisions about pretty quickly about what was going on.
I think it was. And I think that it allowed some space for tenured leaders to let go of the reins and let new leaders step into that space and start making decisions, because the sheer volume of decisions that had to be made were enormous, and we're coming out of it better for it in that regard. And then there was a total commitment to engaging the membership and consulting them as we made decisions. And I think that those structures that were existing really paid off.
Yeah. Lars, in talking to you kind of, I got the impression too that sort of leadership had to make certain choices that, not everybody agreed with necessarily, but they were directional about what PPE to make or how to use the space. And can you talk a little bit about that from your experience?
Yeah, somebody had said, folks were used to, I think it might have been April, used to being involved in the very small conversations all the way up to the big ones, and so it was nice to have that pause. Totally agree. That said, the number of members who have stayed engaged and supportive of the asylum as a resource to the community, as a home for their aspirations and their skills has been enormous. So I don't want to turn this into a us, them. It's very much joint leadership. I do as much as I can to kind of sense the network and sense where different camps are at, because we all have different groups that embody different ideals of a makerspace. And so you kind of just want to listen to them all. But just a couple of good examples. So, one area where we've had to make some decisions is strong-armed authority on who's in and who's out if they break a rule versus the nudge, don't judge kind of thing. And my team and I did put together, I should say, a health and safety advisory group. So A, cover, I'm not the only guy responsible for this, but B, I don't have all the answers, right? So you need to expand that circle. So we do have a safety group that meets every week. Prior to it, we've been meeting twice a week to develop the policies and procedures. But, some folks wanted us to be very I think we've all gone through these emotional highs and lows through COVID. And there was a time when people were pretty damn scared about what this might mean. And some still really are because they're at risk or who knows, right? But I can say as a general rule, we're not as scared today as we were 45, 60 days ago. But 45, 60 days ago, we had people who were sort of like zero tolerance. If somebody's not wearing a mask, they're banned kind of thing. And other people like, no, let's, nudge, be nice, encourage them to give them a mask, like whatever, let's get them on board kind of thing. So that was an area where we adopted sort of more community and mutual accountability versus like a person who's the cop who's out there going to tell you what to do kind of thing. Another kind of decision that we had to make was name tags, right? This was a small thing in my playbook, but a really big thing in other people's playbook. So with masks on, long time between seeing people, we forget names or they're hard to discern who that person is. And so we thought name tags would be a nice gesture. I made the error of coming down too hard and saying, this is a rule, you have to wear a name tag. Got a whole world of hate from sort of like the more sort of libertarian folks, you might say, who feel like wearing a name tag destroys community. You should feel empowered to ask who somebody is if you don't know who they are. And that's all well and good for one group, but there's a very mild-mannered group of superheroes who don't go out and ask people's names and all this stuff. So we had to kind of walk back the you need to wear a name tag to, we strongly encourage our wonderful community makers to wear name tags, something like that, you know. But we're all getting through it. We're learning, you know, you find out where the prickly bits are and you find out where the soft bits are. And it's a balance between, I think, having a sense of goodwill intention, but then accountability for the things that are really mission critical. Some stuff just isn't mission critical and you give a little bit like, oh, okay, I was wrong about that. But it is nice to have both a lot of overall community support, which we can measure and by how many people have sustained their memberships during a time when they don't have access to our services, all the way over to then a general sense of buy-in for the rules of a new reality, if you will. And most folks seem to be pretty tolerant to that.
That's good. That's an interesting sort of dialogue that you're kind of talking about. Of, you know, you kind of have to put things out there, see how they work, whether they're mutually kind of supported and
I think that's what
them.
Rachel was talking about, a little of that trial and error, you know, call and response. We'll see.
Yeah. Matthew Wettergreen, who's from Rice University, the OEKD space there, wanted to ask about university makerspaces they're trying to figure out opening in the fall. And you know, what are some of the, any of you can answer this quickly if you can, what have you learned from strategizing your reopening as to what guidelines you'd recommend for others to adopt? The name tags is kind of a very practical example. Sounds like, you know, just if you have a specific here, a specific guideline, jump in.
So I've been talking to a handful of university makerspaces across New York State, and now the first level that they have to go through is whatever the university safety says, which from what I've heard, they've been changing just as often as all of our makerspaces have been changing in rules and regulations. So that's a bit everywhere. But I would say one system would be a reservation system where you could come in, you know, either reserve a table or reserve a space, so not too many people are in at one time, which also kind of provides as a way for contact tracing.
Yeah, I would say the same thing that Dan said. We're putting together what we're calling our occupancy tracker, so that it keeps the membership informed, including when they're walking in a room. How many people are in that room? How many people are supposed to be in that room? Can you reserve the space, just so that there's tacit awareness that we are all empowered to not do the wrong thing, and just being overt about it.
Yeah. Joe, do you have anything that you're doing?
Yeah, we've been using a reservation system. We actually had instituted a reservation system out of necessity because of a few pieces of equipment. You know, some of our CNC machines, right, were getting double booked or overbooked and having lines, and that caused, you know, some of our, as Laura says, mild-mannered heroes speak up a few times. So we were fortunate that a lot of our membership already utilized a reservation system. Now we have a lot of age diversity in our space, so there's been a lot of, you know, sort of training on like how to access this reservation system. Or, you know, we pride ourselves in having a lot of retirees and skilled trades in the space, and there was a little bit of you know, communication that had to happen, a little bit of nudging, you know, about getting on these systems. But overall, we've got a really good response to that. And I think it's you know, picking up some habits and adding to our culture in a way that will, post-COVID, you know, post-quarantine, add to our makerspace in positive ways. You know, that including some of these Zoom meetings. You know, we've been having weekly member Zoom meetings to go over more aspects of the space and to sort of gauge the temperature of what our membership is interested in, how they feel about the space. And I think we'll keep doing that even afterwards. I feel like a lot of people are more comfortable to pop in and speak their mind in that way. And I don't know how many, I think a majority of these makerspaces are nonprofits. It's been nice to see the renewed interest of our board, my board of directors, in the space in helping us problem solve these issues. So, you know, maybe I'll mention one other thing about some of our opening policies. We talk about the makerspaces being a gym often, and we've continued to use a lot of that narrative. When you're at a gym, you're supposed to wipe down a machine, and so we've asked members to do the same thing. Now we've had to change some of the detergents or the sanitation we've used, because in the metal shop, constantly spraying bleach on metal equipment is bad for some things, but it's created some other habits that we hope will continue on past quarantines in positive ways.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy or Joy. Do you want to? Are there any guidelines that you're thinking about that you could share?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I see with people is touching their masks. So we made that a very, like somebody said, just a cultural thing where if you see someone with their mask and they're touching it, that gets wet, and then they basically infect their hands. It's like an immediate, like, use hand sanitizer, and we've had everybody like offer hand sanitizer. If you see it, it's like, don't make it like, you've touched your mask, but like, oh, I just noticed you touched your mask, and somebody grabs it. But yeah, building into the culture, especially from leadership, like having that be a regular thing, like, oh, I just noticed this. Another thing that's been difficult is the doorknobs. We have a lot of doors in our space. So we just got brackets from Home Depot, and they're already bent, and we just ground some grips in for your foot and hammered those up so you can actually step on it and pull the door open. And then if you put, like, next to the doorknob latch, you can actually use the same stuff for your Mylar face masks to block off that latch entering it, and then all the doors just open with your foot, and nobody's like touching the door. Those are a couple things we found.
If you want to share that might be nice.
I'm putting that.
Post.
We have directions to it.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
And I'm putting the link to our website in the.
Yeah, Cheryl, any guidelines from you?
Sure. So everything everyone else has said, but just to make sure that you're posting these communications everywhere in your space and through your emails. I think consistent communication has been really important for us, so that we decided up front, you have to wear a mask, you have to have your temperature taken when you come in, you have to fob in, you have to fob out, no visitors, all these types of things are drilled into us. It's like everyone has said, it's a culture change, and it is difficult, a little bit painful at first. And, even now into the moving into the third week, us reiterating that has made it a lot easier. I think people have the expectation that things have changed quite drastically. They've experienced that in retail stores and restaurants. So it's not, it's not a shock to anyone, but I think people kind of expect you to loosen up a little bit once they get in the building, and that is just not the case. So having that all posted and saying that, this is, if we are found, out of compliance on these things, we've said that we're going to do these things, that we could possibly get closed down.
I mean, it's actually more like the rules of a workplace than it is the rules of a gym. It's kind of, I see kind of an evolving structure here.
I think the thing that's actually really nice about this too is, like, as I'm listening to all you guys, I realize that, changing culture is hard, right? That's one of the things that's really, really hard, right? You establish a certain culture in a community. Your spaces are all their own individual communities that you've created over all this time. I think April spoke to that a little bit. Over the last 4 years, you created a particular community in a particular way. And it takes a lot to, like, change everybody's mindset. But I think right now, this is not the only difficult conversation we're having. And I think Lars spoke to that just a tiny bit, and not to change the conversation completely, but just to say it gives me a lot of hope to think about the fact that we are, able as a community to make some large changes that help us all, right? And thinking about what that looks like. And I think as we're sort of evolving to change the culture of our spaces, I don't know, it might just be my own personal lens in life, but I'm personally, really happy to think that, even though it's been a challenging time, that, members in spaces are willing to kind kind of work together to do what's best for the entire community, and that cultures can be changed. And I think that, I don't know, right now is something that we all kind of need to hear personally. Maybe again, it's just me, but I personally, you know, am sort of heartened to think that we're able to do these, have these changes and to have them persist and sustain past this time of COVID. And I think the reality is also with COVID in particular, we know that there are going to unfortunately be, as we're hearing on the news today, second waves and possibly even third waves before we get a vaccine, and you know what that means for our communities. So I think these changes are imperative that we are able to do this in a way that keeps us all sustainable.
Joel makes a good point that this eventually, I think, needs to be part of the orientation and safety programming for every space. That is, it's part of welcome, and here's the rules of how we play together and work together. Well, I want to thank everybody for being together today. Thank everybody that attended. Lots of really good links in the chat. I'll try to get those up in the.
Rachel, did you have something? I noticed
this
up there. Oh. Did you have something before we leave?
No worries. Dale has it covered and it can go in the chat. We are doing a integrating COVID training into our onboarding, and that's totally publicly available. So anybody is welcome to look at that program, including it's an actual certification. We won't turn your fob in until you go to COVID training. So we're pretty overt about it, and it'll be publicly available.
Yeah, but I would just, encourage to share with, I'm happy to publish it through Make or anything, some of your ideas, even posters, signs, things that, help spread this, because I think if you can, this is a social change as well as any kind of technical change, and getting people used to it. As some of you were talking about reservations, I say our new language is, hey, can I get a maker table for 2 at 9 o'clock? I mean, this would be like going to dinner or something. We have book our time in the makerspace. So thank you all for being here. And as I said, if you're listening and want to, we're going to convene another group of makerspaces and learn from them as well on Thursday, same time, same station. We'll see you then. Thank you all.
Thank you guys for being on tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Joe, it's good to see your face.